All right, welcome to a live stream that's going to go through the series on training EOS from ETC. We're going to do this using the on-PC version, which is great because you don't need to be in front of a physical console. You can do this and learn from home or from your own computer. It works on Mac and PC. And this is a live stream, and there's nothing scripted here. So we're just going to go through it and talk through some basics. This will be a multi-part series. And let's see, we're going to get to this home page, and we're just going to show you from a regular Google search what I do when I need to go there. ETC Eos Home. And the first search result is this page, usually. Otherwise, you see it's at etcconnect.com, products, consoles, so on and so forth, to get us to this screen here. And this is a great landing page full of tons of resources for learning the ecosystem. They have their own official training courses, both free as well as a place you can get some certifications through, and just a wealth of information, including the online manual. Really recommend that you take some time to go through the manual as kind of after you've learned the basics, you can navigate it around. That's a great source for information. You're going to learn all sorts of stuff. I go through the manual from time to time and still pick up things. I'm going to click on software and downloads, and I'm going to get the current software here. And from here, version 3.2 is the current release. This is early 2025. There is a beta version of 3.2. I think it's 11 that's out now that is available and open to the public. However, we're going to work just with the 3.10. In fact, what's on this computer right now is 3.2.9, so it's the release prior to this. But you can download for both Mac or PC. We're running this on a PC, but it's as simple as clicking on this. It will tell you and ask you where you want to save it. You can save it, and then from there, you can install it. We're going to skip the install process for right now. We don't want to take up the time for that. Here it is already installed on this computer. I'll link to a video on how to A, install, but B, also a second video on how to upgrade properly, because a lot of people don't upgrade properly and they end up having issues down the road. Super common support question I hear from people like on the Facebook forums and whatnot. Once we launch it up, when you launch it for the first time, you're going to see an option between EOS and Element. And since we're training on EOS, we will click that one. And once you ask it for the first time, it's not going to ask you again. However, you see this change console mode. I can click that, and you can see in this box, you get that choice. So when you first go through, it'll ask you this. But once you select EOS, it's going to remember that choice going forward. You've got several choices here. If you don't have a license key, which is a USB dongle, or you're not on physical hardware, you'll see these options, which include offline with Viz, backup is grayed out, mirror, offline, augmented 3D tether, and settings. And if you had a license key and instead of this saying offline with Viz, this would say primary, and that backup would be not grayed out. For everything we're doing here, we're going to use just the simple offline mode. EOS has its own built-in visualizer. This is if you're going to use it with an external visualizer. So I'll click offline. And then I'm just going to sit here and push the about screen. And if you click here, this is our on-screen keyboard, which seems like it goes off the screen just a little bit. Let's see, does it even show up here? I think I'll just move my screens around here just a little bit. So bear with me. So I think if I center that like that, go ahead and get that moved around, this around over there, great. Okay, so I think now we should have everything mostly centered and you can see everything. So sorry about that. Okay, so what we've got here is this is the default screen it opens up to. And we'll just start here. I'm going to click here, and this is the virtual pop-up keyboard. This pop-up keyboard only shows up on an on-PC setup, and it shows you all the buttons available. Look at that. I've never run into this, but I don't normally... I've got it minimized. Normally, you run this completely fully maximized inside your computer screen, but I've got a super wide monitor. So for streaming, I think it's trying to be smarter than I want it to be. I'd say that works well. Okay, great. Move this down just a little bit more. Okay, great. Again, normally people run this on a full screen. My resolution of my screen is like one of those ultra wide monitors, and so we're only using a portion of the screen. That way, most people can view it on their screens normally. Back to this. So when we click here, that opens up the on-screen keyboard, and these are all the commands you'd see on a physical lighting console. And these are the commands that we're often using. They're grouped together in kind of modules or segments. And the one thing I'm going to start off right now is to click on the About button. And so what you'll see is the About button is right here. And you see the little letter Y there in the lower right-hand corner. And so what that means is I can either press About there, which brings out the About screen, or I can also hit it on the keyboard by pressing the letter Y. And this About screen comes up. This is actually getting a remake in the next version, 3.3, but for right now, this is what you'll see. Just some new information's coming out in the next release. The current system count, it's offline, but this is what we're going to focus on is these two numbers, version 329. And the fixture library version is 32812. And again, we've got videos on how to update those for this training. That's not very relevant, but it is nonetheless there. So from here, what I'm going to do is I've already got a show open. So I'm going to clear this out really quick. That way we're just starting from scratch. And we'll go through what all of those options mean here in just a moment. And I'm going to reset all my screens. Okay, great. So what this has done is this is probably where you'll start from a completely fresh install. It should look something like this as opposed to what we had laid out there a moment ago. And what we're going to do is we're going to just build a simple show just to get started, just so you can see and learn the interface. Let's first just walk through and name a couple of things so you're familiar with where they are. Across the top here, first of all, I guess I should say, if you see here at the very top, it might be right off the screen. Let me pull this down just a little bit. You can see right out of view there, this window is named EOS 1. And the reason that is that you can actually have, if you have multiple monitors, you can have multiple windows across those multiple monitors. If you have an ultra-wide monitor like I actually do, you could actually put two windows side by side, which just helps you logically break things up. And then within each, if we'll call it monitor, you have three different workspaces, which are three different views that you can have set up. And so the way some people use those is they'll have one workspace for editing, the second workspace for when they're actually operating a show. And those will come up in the future on how we set those up. And so that's what the 1, 2, and 3 is here. And what we're going to do right out of the gate is I'm going to click on this one here, which is the setup of this current workspace. And across the top, you've got some basic layout templates, if you will. You can modify from here, but those are kind of starting templates. And then across the top here, we can resize, which allows us to modify the exact proportions that each segment is. Monitor mapping allows you to send different views to different monitors. This will close all the tabs. This will reset this workspace. And this sets all workspaces, which I did a moment ago. These are all the different panels or tabs you can have open on your screen. And then for people that are used to the legacy or coming up from older versions, if I click on display and control and go to classic, this is the classic or original order of the tabs, and these are organized by tab number, and that's just in the classic way. Displays and controls is the current way that it defaults to, what most people are used to. There's also this all displays, which I believe does everything alphabetically. But displays and controls is the modern way of doing it, so we'll leave it at that default. From here, I'm going to do a simple setup here of 3 top, and we'll just leave it like that. And so as you can see, it's created a workspace up here, 2 smaller workspaces, and then a section down here, and we'll explain that in a moment. But here is the title of the show file you're working on. Then across the top, this is what's called the pop-up magic sheet, and that's something that can be defined. It's not currently defined, but we'll show you a use of that here in the later on. This is a moving light controls. This is how you can control fixtures from just a quick access pop-up reference. Again, we don't have any lighting fixtures yet, so this doesn't have anything in it. And this is the pop-up snapshot browser, which again, we'll get to those later. The on-screen keyboard, which we've talked about. And then here's our date time. And if I click on it, I can even change this to a 24-hour clock. If that is your preference. It's my preference, so I'll set that. Skipping these three boxes here at the moment, we'll come down here towards the bottom. Again, you'll see the show file name referenced again. Over here are different filters or targets. And this whole area here is referred to as the CIA, or Central Information Area. Right now we've got the settings or file browser set up. We also have this, which allows us to minimize it, which brings that out of view, so it's not taking up nearly as much screen real estate. As you can see, that's kind of helpful there. And then lock, what that does is that locks the CIA either open or closed. Otherwise, if it's like that, it can dynamically open and close as you need it to. So in the on-screen keyboard here, you'll see that what we have is we have displays, which is F9. And so if I hit F9, you see it pops open. And if I hit F9 again, it closes. If I lock it and I hit F9, it doesn't open. As you can see, it stays closed. And conversely, if I open it and then I lock it, now when I hit F9, it stays open the whole time. And so that's just a preference on whether you want to get to it. Usually if you're working or editing a show, you might want to keep that locked open on one of your screens instead of having it like pop up and down. And perhaps when you're operating or running a show, rarely are you ever going to need to go into the CIA during the operation of a show, so you might lock it closed just so that it's out of the way and you always have that screen real estate you're working with. Continuing on down here, let's see, just make sure all of this is fitting in our screen real estate. This is a pop-up here, and this pops up just similar to the ML controls parameters within the lighting fixtures. We'll get to that in a little bit. Down here is your command line. It says live. I can hit F2, which brings us into blind, and you see the whole screen changes to blue, and that's just the state the console is. So live means the changes that I make are live, and they're going out to the lighting rig right now. Blind are changes that I'm making that are affecting cues, but they're not being seen out on the rig. So it's a way to make changes without anybody else seeing them. You know you're doing changes behind the scenes, but nobody visually can see them out on the outputted rig on the stage. Continuing across, there is this magnifying glass, which is a search tool. It is contextual, so the default is channel, because that's what you enter here. And so you can search by channel. However, if we had Q on the command line, which we'll get to in a moment, and I hit search, it will search by cues. Again, we have no cues, so there's nothing to demonstrate yet. And then over here, user one and offline, I can click on that. And if we have multiple users, you'll see multiple users listed here. And offline says the state of the rig is offline. However, it can be changed. If we had a license key in there, it could show online or backup or primary or client. So those are some of the states for that. Here are quick accesses to things like posting intensity, focus, or color to the command line, which we'll go through when we start talking about moving lights. And then this section, we won't go through what these buttons are specifically at the moment, but these are called your soft keys. And soft keys are what will change based off of the context or what you're doing. So right now I'm in a channel look, so then we have those options. If I press Q on the command line, you can see that that changes to a bunch of different options. And so those are soft keys are contextual versus the on-screen keyboard, which represents the physical keyboard on a console. Doesn't matter, these buttons don't change their usage, they are permanent, whereas opposed to these soft keys are not. Also, just for a note that if you are using or you're referencing the manual, the most common way to delineate that something's a physical hard button is the hard right-angled brackets, left and right-angled brackets, versus if you were referencing a soft key, it would be the curly brackets, if you're familiar with those. On that note, what I think I'll do here is I'll show you the on-screen manual, just because that might be a great reference point for this. When I've got a tab open here, I can click on the plus, and within here you can see all the options. And tab 100 is our manual, and this is split into two halves. The right half here, all purple, are controls. Those are things that do things that affect the output to the rig. Displays are usually viewing information or viewing tables that are behind the scenes that are used to create the looks that you see on the stage. So that's the difference between the left and the right. And from here, let's see, I always reference it by tab number. Here you see it manual, which is tab 100. So if I click on that, that now brings up the manual full screen here, and we can scroll through it. You can see all sorts of information. And so this is the first reference I'll show you to. There's the square bracket. So that says the Eos Home or Eos Home. The brackets usually reference a physical button on this keyboard. However, if I click on something here, and this is just randomly looking through to see if I can find a good example in here. So there's your curly braces or curly brackets, depending on where you're from. And when you see them like that, that means look for the button over down in this lower right-hand corner, as opposed to things in square brackets like enter refers to the enter key right there on the on-screen keyboard. When you're first learning, you may go back and forth looking at this often, or you may have a physical console you can work with, but you'll quickly begin to memorize these on-screen keyboard commands, and I'll call those out as those come into use. So that's giving you an overview of the overall layout of the screen. There's a lot here, and there's a lot of context missing because obviously none of this means much to you probably. But just wanted to show you what you're looking at. From here, we're going to move a couple of things around. So these are the three kind of, oops, sorry about that. Close that. There's the close button. These are the three different sections of the screen, and I can actually just take this and drag these around. So I can take these and click on a tab and drag it left to right. And then from here, I can, while holding down the tab button, because we're working with tabs, I can use my left and right arrow and move that across the different windowed sections. And so for right now, I'm going to move what's called the PSD down here, and then I'll click on tab 1, and I'll move that to the lower right-hand corner. And what's important to notice is you see those are numbered there. And actually, before we go further, let me add here. I'm going to click Augmented. And depending on your computer setup, this may take a moment for this to load the first time. And if it's the first time you're ever using it, it might take even longer. And we'll just let that run there in the background. But you can see that Augmented is tab 38. And we add more tabs within one of these panes by clicking the plus sign, and you can see that list again. And so as you see, Augmented is tab 38, the manual is tab 100, and then the other two we're working with is the PSD, which is tab 2, and then also tab 1, which is the channel table, okay? And so that's the tab numbers. And so the value in that is the more experience you get with the system. While holding down tab, and you see here in the lower, you see there in the lower right, you see the word tab actually turn red. While holding down tab, if I push 1, it moves my focus to tab 1. If I hold it down and press 2, it brings my focus to tab 2, or tab 38, it goes to tab 38. In fact, this will even open up windows that, or tabs that don't even exist yet. So if I do tab 37 and release tab, it opens up the color picker, which we see there now. And so that's a quick way people that are using systems a lot and they know which tab they want to go to. You just hold down tab, and it doesn't matter where I'm at. If I want to go back to the augmented, I do tab 38 and release tab, and I'm there. And I press tab 2, and now my focus is there. And what that gold box, or what we call focus, does is it means that all the commands I'm doing are interacting directly with this box, although it might have side effects on other screens. So let's talk about these 4 tabs that I've got open. The first is the live summary, or what you saw on the list is the channel display. This shows you the channels that are patched or in use, which there are none currently. Again, this is a blank show file. The second is a PSD, which stands for playback status display. So this is the playback status of your cues. 38 is Augmented 3D. This is your built-in visualizer. The company will not doesn't like the use of the word visualizer. It's more than a visualizer and also less than a visualizer at the same time. It is a programming tool. It acts like a visualizer because it allows you to actually see your lights and what they're doing on the stage. It's not a proper visualizer because in some ways it doesn't have all the functionalities of a proper visualizing tool. However, what it does do that visualizing tools doesn't do is it allows you to interact and program lights while interacting with what you see on the screen. So we'll get more into that in a little bit. 27 is your color picker. It is one of the ways you can pick a color by choosing something here on the color spectrum. You can also change the look of that, which we'll get into here in a little bit, as well as if you've come from conventional lightings, we have the conventional lighting colors. We'll also talk in the future about why those colors don't exactly match what you see in real life and why that is. Before we go forward, what we're going to do is we're going to patch some things. So I'm going to click on tab 38 so we can see the visualizer. And then on the PSD screen, I'm going to click on the plus. And what we're going to do is we're going to get a patch, which is tab 12. And you can see it really changes the layout of the screen. And part of that is the CIA here is opened up with several options. You can see our visualizing space there. This is now turned to our channel count, and the live channel display there is still available. The whole thing's turned blue because anything we do on here does not directly affect the output to the rig in this state. Beyond the patch view down here, we've opened up this new option, and there's tabs here. These are tabs along the side. So I'm going to go to patch because that's the options we want to work with here. In fact, before we get started here, this is going to dip just an ounce into the real world for a moment, just so that I know this is a place where people get hung up on when implementing this. Starting, I believe it was in version 3.2. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was in version 3.2. They've changed the way the lighting console interacts with the real world. It's added a bunch of new features, but it's also left some people out to dry because they didn't read the documentation about how the protocols work. So when we interact from a lighting console to the real world, we have three different primary ways of communicating from the lighting console to lighting fixtures. The first is local DMX. That is physical data coming out of the back of a lighting console. And this is specifically to the console itself. If you're using something called a programming wing, there'll be physical ports out the back of that, but that's local to the device that you're connected to. And so you can turn those on or off. I recommend turning them off if you're not going to use them. Also for the default protocol, I turn that off as well. Streaming ACN is the industry standard right now. It is what most people are using. However, it is not universal, but it is the most widely used, and there are lots of benefits to using streaming ACN. When you open up EOS, it is the default. If you upgrade it from 3.1 or earlier to 3.2, it defaults to streaming ACN or SACN, and it disables ArtNet. And that has left several people out because they are using ArtNet in their infrastructure instead of streaming ACN. So as we can see here, we've got a bunch of check marks here for streaming ACN, and ArtNet is not enabled. And so we're going to turn those on right now just for the sake of this example, because that's what people have most often got caught up on. So I'll show that. If you don't know what infrastructure your actual lighting network is using, it's good to find that out. The use of this is outside the scope of this tutorial, starting with because we're doing everything in imaginary training land, not on physical lighting fixtures. But I did want to point that out because that's within this menu system. So going from here, I'll go back to patch. And from here, we'll start patching several lighting fixtures. And in this first lesson, we're going to talk strictly with conventional lighting, so not moving lights, simply because they've got, it's the best way to learn some of these principles. And then later on, we'll go into how it looks like with moving lights. So what we're going to start here is I'm going to say channel 1. So all I do is from this screen, if I hit the number 1, it automatically prepends it with the channel. The word channel, and so it's got the number 1. And then the syntax from here is I'm going to say A on the keyboard, which will post address to the command line. And this is the address of where that light is actually plugged into in your setup. And I'm going to keep things easy, and I'm going to say that that's at address 1. And so here now, up above, we see channel 1 is at address 1, and the type is a dimmer. And since we're working with conventional lights, that's just fine. We can add a label, which we'll do in a moment. And then you see things like streaming ACN priority, what interface. So this goes back to the streaming ACN DMX or ArtNet, and the output was the current intensity output for that lighting fixture. So as you saw, we disabled DMX, but we enabled streaming ACN and ArtNet, and you can see there's a little star in that to indicate it. Also, we can go off to the right here again. We see type is dimmer, the label, which we'll get to in a moment. The interfaces that are selected are both streaming ACN and ArtNet. The channel was one, the address is one, and preserve native is disabled, and we can talk about that in the future. In a real rig, I can press flash and let go, and it will make the light, as you see here, it comes up and it drives the output up. And you can see how it's fluctuating up to full, and I'll press flash again, and you can see the output goes to 0. That's just a great way to sit there and say, you hit the flash, and is the light you think you're programming the actual light you're programming? Also great when you're going into a venue and you're not exactly sure what those first 10 lights are, but you kind of know where the addresses are. You can literally just use the flash and say, oh, okay, I see where that light's pointed, and then label it accordingly. In the middle here, this shows you the addresses in use within your universe, and we'll get to universes later, but by default, we're working in universe 1. And you can see that only address 1 is in use, which is the only one we have patched so far. We'll give this a label, and I'm just going to label this front light. And I use that by just clicking on the word label. There's more than one way to do it. We'll get to that next. But we don't have just one light. We usually have dozens or hundreds of lights. And so I'm going to fill out the next 3 lights by using a range of lighting channels. So I'm going to say channel 2, and then T for the word through, and 4. And I'll say at 2. Enter. And because the dimmer is only one channel, it's assuming the offset between each of these fixtures is 1. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4 as it's gone through that range. To assign them all to dimmers. And you can see that they're all still currently selected. And now what I can do while I'm in this state, and this is posted and this is there, I can press L on the keyboard to get label, and I can also call these front light. And press enter. And so now you can see those are selected. Down here, you can see how it's slightly changed gray because that one isn't selected, but it is patched. And then 2, 3, and 4, because they're selected, are showing up here in yellow. To go back to the on-screen keyboard to see how we would do this using the on-screen keyboard, even though you can't really see behind the scenes, let's say I had a 5th light, I would go 5 for channel 5, at for address, and then 5 for the address we're going to. And then even before I press enter, I can press label. Which I always can never find because I'm usually doing this right on the keyboard, so label is right there. And then I could also call this front light. And press enter. And now when I hide my on-screen keyboard, you can see it's done exactly the same. And so that's how you would do it, either on a physical face panel or through using the keyboard. When I'm doing something like this, my hands are probably just on the keyboard, and I'm just doing all the keyboard shortcuts because there's no need to go between a physical keyboard to do things like labeling and then back to the what they call the face panel here. So now we've done the first 5 lights. I'll do just one last one, channel 6 at 6, and label is front light as well. And so now we've passed our first 6 fixtures. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say 1 through 6, which grabs all 6 fixtures. And just to show you what happens now is you see that they're all still dimmers and the labels are the same, but anything that's got an attribute that is different between them will show this asterisk, because obviously there are multiple channels at multiple addresses, so that makes sense. From here I'll go to attributes. These are other attributes that we can set. We will skip all of these now, but they will become relevant down the line. In the database, these are basic text fields that you can fill in that are useful to you when you're searching for data. So remember I showed you search earlier. We can search on some of these attributes here, or sort or do reports based off of these. So for example, I might just type in text 1 that this is an let's see, text 1 label, and within that text 1 I'm going to call this HPL 575 because those have been lamped with 757 lamps instead of the 750 watt lamps. But you can see here on this screen, and in fact, if I took this tab and I move this up to the top so that you've got the wider view, you can see out all the way across. We've got all of these fields that we can look through. I'll move that back down below because the next thing we're going to get to is the augmented section. So when I click here on augmented now, we still have all 6 fixtures selected. You can set their physical space or their location within physical space. And you don't see any lighting fixtures here currently, and that dotted area is the conceptual stage right there. And so nothing happens until we actually assign values to these. So now that I've set that at 1 foot, you can now see all the lights fit, magically up here. But for right now, the x-axis, I'm going to leave them at 0. You can see that I can move them left and right on the stage. And as you can see, the plus values go stage left, and the other values go stage right. This is assuming you're looking at the stage from the audience position. The Y is either going up stage or down stage. And for this example, we're just going to call these actually like proper front lights. We're going to come out here to something like 20 feet past center stage. And then Z is going to be my height. And so as you can see, as I come up here in height, you can actually see the light beam and how it's focused and where it's pointed. So it's pointed straight down. And they're all in the same spot. And so you could literally sit here and say channel 1 is at negative 10 feet and channel 6 is at positive 10 feet. And so now we've got those 3 lights and go through and label them. But if they are evenly spaced, I'm just going to say channel 1 through 6. And then I'm going to set my X position here. Right? And so I'll click on that value, and I'm just going to say negative 10 through, and you can see the 3 button there, or the letter T on your keyboard, 10. So that's negative 10 through 10, and now when I press enter, it's going to evenly distribute those across the front. And then how we navigate within this augmented 3D, it does require a mouse with a scroll wheel, so I'm just using the scroll wheel to go in and out, and then while clicking and holding down the center button on your scroll wheel allows me to move about space in this direction. And then if I hold down the right button, it allows me to translate in this direction. And so those are my navigation controls, or at least some of them. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just kind of navigate into kind of almost a view from where the lighting fixtures are, just so we can kind of see from the lighting fixtures position, but I want to see all of them, not just one of them. And then from here, what we're going to do is while they're all selected on our degrees, you can see that as I move this degree up, it moves them towards on stage, which is exactly what we want. And so now we've got those lights roughly going across the stage. You can, of course, change things. In fact, these are quick 90-degree rotations, so you can see as I rotate those 90 degrees in either direction, as well as things like on the Z rotation as well. But for right now, that will work for what I'll say is our main demonstration purposes here. Navigating the space is something that is just something you get used to. And again, a combination of the scroll wheel, clicking down on the scroll wheel, and then using the right mouse button to kind of move about in space. You can also use your left, right, up, and down arrows as well on your keyboard. Plus, there are other commands that you can find in the documentation for navigation. But for right now, we're going to use this as our reference for our view. So we've just now added 6 lights to the stage. They are now patched, and you can kind of see where they're pointed to. And this is not super realistic. Usually you have more than one light pointing to the same place on the stage. They're not evenly distributed, but this will help for our demonstration purposes to see what it's like when we start now going into the programming portion. So from here, I'm going to press F1, which brings us back into the live view. You can tell it's live because it says live down here, and you've got kind of a gold highlight. If I press F2 on a Mac, what you see is it gets to this blue background, and it says blind queue. And again, on the On the on-screen keyboard here, you can see live is there and blind is there. And the F1 and F2 are listed there as well. So we're going to go to F1, which gets us into live mode. And now we're going to start making some adjustments to the lighting intensities themselves. And so on the main live screen, if I press 1, that gives me channel 1. And I can say A for at, and then say 5, and that brings that lighting fixture up to 50%. And we can see that that's that first light we showed there, and you can see the value is at 50%. And the shorthand that ETC has built into it is that it assumes every single-digit number you put in is a decade. So if I say 1 at 3, enter, it adds the 0 after. It's assuming you're wanting 30%. It's because in most cases, we're not dealing with 0 to 10. Normally, we're dealing in much larger increments like 20, 30, 40, and so it saves keystrokes. Instead of saying at 3, 0, enter, you're literally shaving, you're going from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 button presses down to 4. So that's a 20% savings in keystrokes, and that gets multiplied out towards all the keystrokes you're doing. So plus I would imagine the 0 button on the keyboard might get worn out quite quickly. But it automatically assumes that if I say at 3, it means at 30%, which now means that if I want it to be at actually 3%, you do 0, 3, enter. All right, so moving on from here, there are a couple other shorthands we've got. I can say 1 at full, so F is full. So I could do 1 at F for full, enter, and that brings it up to 100%. Or another shorthand, without you having to move to the enters, if I hit full twice, it brings it up all the way to full. So by hitting full a second time, it terminates it without having to press enter at the end. Another example, I'll say 2 at out, and out is automatically terminating. There is no need to enter behind out. And just to show you where those are, you've got at, full, and out are all right next to each other. So again, I can say channel 2 at 5, enter, or 2 at full, or 5 at out. And those are where you're just living in this very efficient little space of commands here. Moving beyond that, we also have this concept of levels. So I'll say 5 at, which puts level and terminates. And this is a user definable number. So if you find that in lighting a show, you're almost always using, in this case, 80%, you can set that up within the settings. We'll show you where that is. I'll hit F9 for displays, go under file. I'm sorry, not under file, under setup, user settings. And let's see, I believe it is in here. Am I correct? I never changed this, so it's something. Oh, it is right there. So sorry, under user, manual controls, button values, you can see level is 80%. So if I change this and I find myself setting my lights to 90 all the time, I can set level now to be 90. And so now when we go back to live and I go 5 at, now you can see that will set that to 80%, or 90% rather, which you can see right there, okay? Moving on, we can do through. You saw magically earlier, it does a range. So if I do 1 through 6 at 5, so there's my through selecting a range of lighting fixtures at 5 and enter, it sets them all to 50%. But I also can do 1 through 6 at 1 through 8, enter. And so now that does the range of lighting fixtures going 1 through 80%, and then all the variations in between. So there's my use of through. So you can use it to select both a range, but you can also use it to apply or spread values across a range. The other thing I'll show you here is that if this is my command line, it remembers those channels. You can see those channels are still selected. So say I wanted these all now to be at 50%. I don't have to select the channels again. If I just say at 5, enter, it now sets those all at 50%. And so say I need to go, that's not quite, let's try 80. Okay, 80%, that's what we're looking for. So that becomes an option as well. And so that's how I can change my lighting intensity. On a physical console, it's not represented here, but on most consoles, there's a scroll wheel here, kind of like a giant scroll wheel that you have on your mouse, and that allows you to increment or decrement those numbers as well. Also, right now, we'll take time to talk about the ML controls. ML control stands for moving light controls, and it's this pop-up screen. And here it shows you all the attributes that are available for the fixtures you have selected. Right now, all we have is intensity, and that's kind of the virtual intensity wheel here. And depending on, you can hover your mouse over here and use this built-in scroll wheel. And as you can see, the numbers there increment or decrement, same thing here. So I can go in both directions here. But also you can click and hold down the mouse. So if I click near the center, you can see those go down at a certain rate, but if I click down here, you can see they go down at a much faster rate. And so where you click and hold on here can control how quickly, so I'm jumping down by like single digits here, and down here I'm jumping down by much larger digits. So that's a place for control. And this is all just simulating what you'd have perhaps on a physical console with what we call encoder wheels. So I'll close that, but that's just another way you can set the values. We additionally have, in some of the pop-up ML controls, we actually have a tab with ML controls, and that's tab 5 right here. And so you can see the same thing represented here. And again, what I'll do is I'll close this tab, which I can right-click on this and say close. So right now, tab 5 is not visible anywhere, but if I hold down the tab button, press the number 5, and then release, you see it pops that up. And then, of course, I can move this to a different screen if I want it to, so I can have both the view of that and my augmented available. So just a quick recap where we've been so far. We've gone in the system. We kind of showed you the basic layout of the screens. We've shown you how to patch conventional fixtures. We've shown you how to patch a range of them and label them. We have shown you how to set the intensity, how to move them in augmented 3D space. And so that's our current state, what we've done so far. Now from here, I'm going to go back into patch really quick, just because we left out 2 tabs. So I just want to show those 2, but we're going to really go over them really quickly, but I want to make sure that we don't skip past them. So the first is, this was position and orientation of those fixtures. The next is FPE, which is something for a later training video. You can look up some of the training videos on augmented 3D and or augmented. I always call it augmented 3D, which is redundant because it's in its own name. But FPE allows us to set focus points on the stage, so then you can use some augmented reality in order to focus your lights and fixtures. We'll get back to that later. Beyond that, we have protocols, which we went through at the very beginning. And then device list is where we start talking about RDM. And again, kind of beyond the scope of these videos, at least to start with, I will have videos in the future about RDM, but RDM allows two-way communication between physical lighting fixtures, so they can communicate bidirectionally with the lighting console, which is really neat. What I will say is a lot of people get into trouble, and if you end up with a lighting fixture, you load a show or do anything like that, and what you notice is you have lights that are flickering outside of your control. The number one thing is we tell people is to come into RDM, and you see all RDM is disabled and you can't enable it because this is in offline mode, but make sure you have device discovery disabled. But also within the protocols, is it in here? No, but within, if you're on local DMX, turning it off there is sufficient. But in ArtNet or streaming ACN, you'll have whatever your output nodes are. Those might have RDM enabled. And so those are, RDM is great for fixtures that support it, but some cheap fixtures as well as old fixtures don't know what to do with it. And they'll put on a disco light show outside of your control if they don't actually support the RDM protocol. It's been around for, I believe, 2 decades, but it's still surprising that you can buy fixtures today that don't support it, but they're usually the cheaper knockoff fixtures. So there, we've just covered everything through patch. So I'll close the CIA here, and I'll press F1 to get us back into live. All right, the next thing we'll do is we'll start programming a couple of queues. What I'm going to show you first here, however, is that you see that this is our channels and they're all in red. And so we're going to go over the 4 basic colors that you need to know about when it comes to these fixtures for those values, and then we'll go from there. So red means they're manual values, which means that they aren't saved anywhere. They're manually set and they're being output to the rig. So I am outputting to the rig 30% on these fixtures out to the rig in real life. So there they are. You also see up here in red, it says manual channels, which means that we have some manual channels with data set. So that's just a caution. Hey, what you're looking at on stage isn't saved anywhere. So it's kind of like unsaved. There are 2 other places, although they're somewhat unrelated and somewhat related. Up here we see an asterisk. The asterisk says that this entire show file hasn't been saved. So not even just the specific lick, but the entire patch and rig has not been saved. So that's what the asterisk says. So we'll deal with that first. So I'm going to hit F9, which is also, again, found as displays here in the on-screen keyboard. And then I'll go to File, and I'll go to Save, and I'll press Enter, and it says, do you really want to save? And I'll say yes. We're going to give it a show file name, and I'm just going to call this Training 1, and I'm going to call this version 3.2.9, because that's the version of software I'm running on the computer right now. That way, if in the future people see things don't line up exactly with this training, just know that this is version 3.2.9 that we're running. So I can close the CIA right now, and now you can see that the label is up there. There is no more asterisk behind it because we don't have any unsaved data, but that's going to change quite quickly here. The red is still red because while we've saved the entire show, we haven't saved this to a queue. In fact, on the queue list is empty. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to just record these into a queue. Oh, I'm sorry. Before we get to that, we were talking about colors. Let's finish up colors really quick. Red means unsaved manual data. This comes from the official training. This color code is just remembering that the sky is blue and the grass is green. So if it's a blue value, it means the value is increasing from the prior value. Green means it's decreasing from the prior value. And purple means it's tracking. It's the same color. Purple is that, or magenta, I think, is the official documentation where it is magenta. Means that that's tracking from a prior queue. So it's just holding over queue to queue. Red is manual. Beyond that, we also have white and yellow and several other colors we'll cover when we get to those. But for right now, what we need to know about is red is manual. Blue is increasing, green is decreasing, and purple is maintaining. And so from here, when we write to queues, we've got 2 methods to save our queues. And if we open this up, you can see we have the option of recording and updating, and we'll go through, there's other variations, but the 2 you need to know about right now are recording and updating. And so updating is updating an existing queue. Well, we have no existing queues to update. So I'll press R to record, and I'll press the number 1 for Q1 and enter. And now all of a sudden we have Q1. Those values go to blue, as we talked about, increasing because the queue before Q1 is Q0. And that's an implied queue, which is nothing. There are no outputs to the rig that way. So we're increasing from 0 to 30. So there shows the increase. And then just to continue showing some other changes, I'll take channels 2. I'll use the plus symbol on the keyboard for plus 6, and I'll set those at 5, enter, so that's at 50%. And then I'll press R to record, and the number 2, enter. And so now we've recorded Q2. And since we're sitting in Q2, we'll see that 2, 4, and 6, which we changed are blue because those increased from 30. And 1, 3, and 5 are in magenta because they are maintaining from their prior values. And then just to be fun, we're going to take 1 and 3 and 5, enter. And I'll set those at out, enter. Actually, I think I typed that at 0, enter. And I will record Q3, enter. And so now you can see those are green because those are coming down from 30 down to 0. Okay, so now how do we move across the queue list? What you see down here is the queue that's on our loaded screen. So here on the on-screen keyboard here on the left, We've got our next, our back, our load, and our queue stack. And so this allows us to go back in our queue stack. So back to Q2 and back to Q1 and back again to Q0, again, which is an implied value. The value here on the right is the next queue up. So we're in Q1. We're going to go into Q2. Yellow is our current queue. This is our next queue. And as we go into the next queue, you see that's red for a while. And red just means we're transitioning into that queue currently. And when it's yellow, we have fully transitioned into the look of that queue. And so this is our playback, our master playback pair. You can see that here. And within Nomad, the space bar is what's used to go forward. And then the control space, at least on a PC, makes you go back. So control space now brings us back to 1, and control space again brings you back to 0. And then the other thing we'll talk about that is that the back button is dual purpose. And so this is also a stop button. So if I click go and I hit that, again, you see how it turned into a stop symbol there? This means I've stopped or held it or froze it mid-transition. And then from here, if I hit go again, it continues with the queue until it's done. And then you'll see that change from a stop symbol to back. And so now when I push this, it goes back into the prior queue. And so just be aware that that's the utilization of how that works. I'll click go again here, and you'll see time, and that shows you that it's taking 5 seconds to go, and this is the percentage it's got to go in order to complete that queue. You may get an error message like this. Let me see if I remember the keyboard command. There we are. So if when you hit the spacebar, you see this error, spacebar disabled in setup, Alt-G to enable. So the default is spacebar is enabled, but it can be disabled. So this is helpful if you're working with, again, just not a fresh show. If I hit the spacebar and you get this error, it means that the spacebar will not let it advance. It's like a safety feature. Because this works on all consoles. So if you have a physical keyboard connected to your physical console and it's at the edge of your desk, you could accidentally lean into your desk and hit the spacebar. I've done that. So on my consoles, I leave spacebar disabled because I don't want to accidentally hit it. Should I be that close to the keyboard? Probably not, but it's real life and it happens. That's my guess why they've disabled it, because it's this giant target that you can easily hit. So Alt-G on a PC, you see that toggles between spacebar go enabled and spacebar go disabled. So we'll leave it enabled, and that will allow us to go through the queues. Okay, now what I'm going to do, I'm going to press Tab and 1 to get that back up so we can just see a bigger viewpoint here. And in all these views, if I right click on this, I can change a whole lot of settings that you can have for information displayed. And so I am going to add just 2 that are missing, because they just don't show up on the screen right now, so we'll do that. Also, we can use these arrows to manipulate. So I'll take alert timing, and I'm going to move that all the way up towards the top. So that allows us to reorder these things on where they show up. And I like having my labels up really close, and I like my notes up really close, but other people like things in different orders. You can always reset to the default as well. And you can also set the current as the default. So if I set the current as the default, it will open up with these as your default. I'll click off of that, and so now we can see queue, alert, label, notes, uptime, downtime, focus, and so on. And so let's talk about these attributes of a queue. So alert timing, we'll come back to that, but that has a way of just giving the operator an indication about when the next queue should probably be taken, but it doesn't do anything automatically. It's just like a stopwatch, giving you a countdown to the next queue, and it's up to the operator to actually go into that queue. I don't think shown here, because we don't have it enabled with just timecode. So timecode is another column they'll have in there. Was that not? Let's see. Yep, timecode's right there. It's just way off to the end. So I'll bring that all the way up here. I run timecode often, so I'll also have timecode showing. You can you can click here on the title and drag to make these smaller or larger as you need them. I'm just going to make them smaller as we go across so we've got more room. So alert is time in seconds. Time code is time code. That's a huge other topic that we'll get to at some point. Label is the name that we might have. So I can sit here and say what, instead of channel, because as you recall, if I hit a number, it assumes channel. So if I hit the letter Q, even the lighting Q starts with the letter C. When we sit here and look at Q, it's the letter Q. So I'll type Q1 and enter. You can see now that Q1 is kind of highlighted there. It also says Q1 here. I'll press L for label, and then I'll call this first Q. And what you'll see is that EOS has a language and commonalities. So that label button isn't just used to label a queue, it is used to label lighting fixtures, queues, and more. And what's nice is as you learn the syntax, you can just put things together in similar structures. So I can say Q2 through 3, there's our through again, L for label, and I'll just say next Q. And now it's labeled both of those as well. Notes is an additional field for you to put even more information in. There are different ways different people use them. In what I use most of the time, this is the thing that is happening, or this is the thing of what I need to know from like a lighting perspective. When I'm lighting songs, I might say verse 1, verse 2, chorus, refrain, and then the notes usually include notes on when that cue is to be taken. That's my own personal way of doing things. The system does have the ability to expose long form notes, but we'll get back to that at another time. But labels, notes, and then int up and int down is intensity up and intensity down. And so you see this bar goes across the whole width, and that means that it's going to come up in 5 seconds, and the lights that are decreasing are going to come down in 5 seconds. But you can change those, and we'll see an example there in just a moment. Focus, color, and beam have to do with timings relating to focus, beam, and color of things of moving lights. The duration is the overall duration for everything, so how long that queue is going to take to complete. And then we've got some other attributes we'll go into soon enough, but we'll just explain. Marking, that's M is mark, B is block, and A is assert, P is preheat, MV is move, and AF and R I'm blanking on, but when we get to those, we will expose those for what they are as well. In fact, if I right click here, it'll say, all fade and release, which I often am not using those, but I know other people do. So we'll talk about those. Here are some additional timings or other information. Follow and hang, which is another attribute I have earlier on. Follow hang is an automatic follow from one queue to the next. In fact, let's do that one now just because I think that's really fun. So I'll do Q2, and then for follow hang, I could even just click right here and it does follow, and I click again and it says hang. So it's really nice that you can interact in that way. Or if I go Q2, and now what we'll do is we'll reference our soft keys, which I've talked about previously. Number 2 there is follow hang. We access these. Obviously, if I just press 2, that's not going to do what we want. So that 2 down there is actually the Alt key on a Windows keyboard. So if I say Alt 2, it posts follow, which is the first FW. And if I hit it a second time, it goes to hang. Because really, you're either ever going to follow or hang on a queue. And so that's how you access that. And then these gray ones that are higher up, if I hit more SK, it flip-flops the 2. And so now these buttons do what's listed here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a follow for the moment. So Alt 2 for follow. And I'm going to say 1, enter. And so now under follow hang, you see an F1. And so Control space brings us back to Q1. And now when I go into Q2, what's going to happen is as soon as I go into Q2, in 1 second, it's also going to go into Q3. And what's important to know is that the system can play back multiple queues simultaneously. And so we're going to bring this back down below so that we see it here. And I'll go back into augmented. And I'll do Controls, Tab, Tab, Tab to go all the way back to Q0. And so you can see as I go into that first queue in 5 seconds, all the lighting fixtures slowly fade up over 5 seconds to their 30% value. And then when I hit the next queue, we're going to see queues 2, 4, and 6 in 5 seconds slowly start going up to their higher value, and 1, 3, and 5 after 1 second later start to come down. So let me go into that queue and you'll see that. So here we go. We can see the queues are going up, and then now the other queues 1 second later are starting to go down. So you can see there was a pause between those two. And then what we'll show you here, it's off screen because we've made this so small. I'll just kind of like drag these and make these as small as they'll let us, which isn't super, super small. Yeah, I can't quite fit that, so I'll right click, and in this view, I'm gonna hide flags, and I'm gonna hide timecode and notes. So now we can fit more on the screen, and so there's our follow hang. So now I'm gonna say Q2, and I'll double click on follow hang, and now I'm gonna say a hang of 1, all right? And then I'll shift or control space, which brings us into Q1. And now what hang, so follow is, as soon as you go into Q2, it's gonna wait that 1 second, and then it's gonna automatically fire the next queue. You also see it indented here. Hang says, wait 1 second after this queue is completed. So what I'll do is now when I go into 2, you see these take 5 seconds to come all the way up to their new values. And then as soon as they hit their value, they wait a second, and then it automatically takes the next queue. And so those are great for, especially when you have 2 queues that need to follow in discrete timings, but they happen so quickly, you don't want to have an operator try to hit them that close together sequentially. We'd rather just take this queue, and then the next queue takes automatically. And in fact, the way we're doing it here is probably the most common way you'll see it, which is I've got light, and now I've got some lights coming up for these 3 people that are now singing, and then the other 3 people, as they start to leave, the lights come down off of them. And so that's actually kind of a typical way we might see something like that being implemented as well. Tab left to get it back up. So that's follow hang. Link allows us to say, instead of going into the next queue, so I'm going to come here, Q2, and if I want to get rid of the follow hang, I can just post follow or hang to the command line and press enter with nothing behind it, and that will remove it. And link says, where's the next queue I'm going to? So now instead of follow hang, I'm going to click I'm going to click link loop, and I'm going to say 1, enter. And you'll see now it says link 1, and down here you'll see it says link 1 first queue. So what that means is I'm in Q1. When I go into Q2, we're in Q2, but now you can see both here and down here, my next queue is Q1. So I hit that and it brings me back to Q1. And then I go into Q2, back to Q1. So this allows you to navigate. Now, navigating that way is kind of silly, but it is one way that we do it to set up a loop, that we can intentionally be in a loop and then have something else that pulls us out of that loop. But more significantly or more commonly, what we're doing is we're going to skip Q3, 4, and 5, and we want to go to Q6. So that allows us to jump to Q6. Loop is a form of link, and that allows, again, effects loops to run through for a certain number of times. We'll talk about that later. Curve is a really nice one. Let's see here. I believe that's under attributes and curve. And when I click on curve, it's blank. You've got to put in a number. And so the question is, well, what are those numbers? Where do those numbers come from? So let's go into that. I'll click on curve, which is tab 21, and you can see that there's a bunch of preset curves starting in the 900s. In fact, a lot of the default things like effects, curves, and whatever start at 900. Something really way out of the way, so you can do 1 to 899 however you want. But what you'll see is down here, this is the curve of the value that the lighting console Q programming is doing and what's actually getting outputted. So this takes the control input and changes the output. This is advanced, but we'll hit this really quickly. So you can see here there's just different performance curves. There's really unique design reason for why we would do the ones that we do, but that allows us just so you can see what it does. So in this case, inverted means that when the lighting console says it should be at 0, really put 100% out to the device. And then as we go up to 100, bring it down to 0. In a lighting fixture, super, super rare that you might have something inversely proportional, but let's just say we had some piece of a moving light that was hung inverted. You might do something like that. Again, that's probably not the best example because for lighting fixtures, we would actually go about that a different way. So maybe forget that I even said that. Let's go through. Let's see, what else did I forget or leave out? Rate is speed. FX are your effects, things like strobe. And then execute is for some additional commands. And just so we don't get ourselves in trouble, I'll click here on link loop and press enter, and that clears that out. Okay, excellent. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the fact that this is what's called a tracking console. And there is tracking and non-tracking consoles. In fact, tracking consoles are the way we do queues by tracking is the older method, and then because of technical limitations, we moved away from tracking, and now we're back to tracking because it makes the most sense. But let's just show you how we can look at this. So what I'm going to first do is press F2, which brings us into the blind view, and everything here remains relatively the same. And then in here, what we're going to be using is the word format, which is F4. So I'll press F4. And this brings us into what's called the blind spreadsheet view. And specifically what's selected are channels in use, which is our channels 1 to 6. And this is probably the biggest reason why we do this in with conventional fixtures, because you've only got a single parameter, so it's super easy to see what's happening here. So what a tracking console means is whatever you tell a lighting fixture to do, it's going to continue to do it until you explicitly tell it to do something different. It's just like a light switch in your house. When you turn a light switch on, it is on. You don't have to continue to sit there and hold the light switch on as long as you want the light to be on. When I turn a light on in the kitchen, it's on. And then if I go into the dining room and turn that light on, now both lights are on. And they only turn off when you go to the switch and flip them off. And the same is true with the lighting fixtures. And that is really simple to understand when we're talking about a conventional lighting fixture. But that will really help people when they understand that moving lighting fixtures do the exact same thing. And so here we can see this is now listed by queues going down this way, and the lighting fixtures across the top. And the parameter we're looking at here is intensity, which on a conventional fixture is the only parameter we've got initially. And then we have the queue label here just for our assistance. And so again, remembering the color scheme, blue means going up because it's coming up from 0. Purple is maintaining, and green is going down. And so I can look here very simply and seeing what's the progression of channel 1. So this is going up to 30, staying at 30, and then going down to 0. And then on channel 2, we're going from 30 up even higher to 50, and then we're maintaining at 50. And so this is what a tracking console does, which is it's going to track those values until we tell it to change or to do something different. Now let's talk through about how we can modify this further or go more advanced. So while I'm here, I'm going to say channel 2 at 50. Actually, I'm sorry. We'll do channel 1 at 30. And you're sitting there saying, well, it's already at 30. So when I hit that, you see that it changes to blue. And what that does is it means that we are, which is interesting, that should change white. So I don't know if that was a bug in this version or not. Let's see here. Because I would expect that to be white. Because that's tracking through. The purpose, the value in doing that is that now if I go 1 at 25, enter, by setting that to 30, it is maintaining the fact that this is still 30. If I hadn't, so I'll show you the undo system. Super helpful on the undo, unlike the official documentation, because this has changed in version 3.2. Prior to version 3.2, I believe, Undo would only let you go back to the last time you saved the show file, where now it lets you go back further in most situations. So it lets you go past a save. It used to be that once you saved your show file, the undo history would freeze immediately and you'd start from scratch. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go up here and I'm going to select the last two commands and press enter to undo those. And that is the undo. And in fact, while we're here, let's show you save. So to save here, again, now we see the asterisk because while we saved the file, we've made changes to that show file. The two ways to do it is, again, we can go into displays or F9. And then from F9, we can just click save right there and it will save again where we're at. Or what you can do is a quick save. And quick save is holding shift and pressing U for update. And you can say that it saves the show, the asterisk goes away. And from the on-screen keyboard, shift and update, and that will do a quick save. It is important to know that when we look back at those save files, that you can see there's the live stream training, and you can see that that's from the arrow to the left is the name I labeled it, and from there right is automatically appended to the file name, and it's got the date, so year, month, day, and even the timestamp. And then you see there's that little caret there. If I press the right arrow, it expands it down, and it actually has every single save I have as well. So this allows you to actually jump back to prior save states as well. So just kind of a helpful thing for if you need it. I'm going to press F2 to go back into blind. I'm going to go to Q1, enter, and then I'll say 1 through 6 at 30, enter. And then I'll say 2 at 30. I'm sorry, we're going to Q2, and that will be the number 2 at 30, so channel 2 at 30, enter. And so you can see now that that has underlined 30 and it tracks 30. And so that white and underlined means that that is reasserting the same value that it was at. And if I go to channel 1 at 30 and press enter, it does the same thing there as well. And I think in this live stream, I may have just found a bug, so we might have to try that out here in just a minute. But what you can see here is what's that saying is now I'm asserting 30. So if I go back into Q1 and I take channel 1 and set that to 20, enter, that still remains 30. Now the white goes away because it's no longer a duplicate, but it's calling your attention, hey, you've defined 30 and you've resaid you want this to be 30. And so that means that if you make a change up here, don't expect it to track forward because behind the scenes, I'm remembering that I'm really 30. Even though at the moment it looks like I'm tracking forward. I hope that makes sense. So normally tracking forward 30, 30, 0, and the only thing that really has a value written into the queue is this 30 and that 0. And this middle 30 doesn't really, is just tracked. It's not actually written into the queue. Versus here, it's written in there as 30, and it's also written in there as 30. Same thing here. That's 20, 30, and 0. And if we went back in time, it'd be 30, 30, and 0, which means if I change this, it will not change moving forward. So that is how tracking kind of comes into play here. Another super valuable one is let's take Q3. So we're sitting here in Q3. And this is something I know works in live. I actually don't know if it works in blind. But let's give it a try. So we're sitting in Q3. You see we're in Q3. I'm going to put channel 6 at 30, but before I press enter, I'm going to hit the word trace, which is the letter J on the keyboard. So I'll hit trace and enter. Actually, let's not do 30. Let's do 40. That way it's super clear. And then trace, enter. And yeah, that does work in blind. I use this extensively in live. And so what it doesn't do is set channel or Q30 to the channel to the value of 40, it traces back up the stack to where it was first set. Okay, so let me go back into undo. I always forget what undo is. Control X, yeah. So Control X brings up my undo box. And I'm gonna undo my trace command, press enter. And then we'll go back into blind by F2. So there we see it. So I don't wanna just change the current queue that I'm in, channel 6 to 50. I want to go back to where it was originally set. And so let's just say this is front light, and because of the costume the actor is wearing or the makeup they've got on today, I need to change it, but I'm not noticing it. I should have noticed it in Q1, but I didn't notice it till Q2 or a subsequent Q. I can say channel 6 at whatever it needs to be brighter, 65, J for trace, enter. And now it sets that to 65 all the way to the back to when we first set that value. So trace is super helpful. I use this very frequently when I need to go back and say, you know what, this was always wrong from the beginning. Now I don't need to go all the way back to Q1, because Q1 it was like at 30, like a low dim light, right? It wasn't until Q2 where the lights came up to be prominent on the person. And so that's the effect of doing Q. Now if we go to channel 4, just for example, and I say at full, and I do trace twice, watch what happens. Nothing. I always forget, I rarely use trace. I know trace put sequentially goes back and does something special, and I don't use it, so I don't remember it. I always have to go back to the documentation, which is where documentation is your friend. So tab 100, enter, and it brings up our help. And then from here I can go search, and I can say the word trace, enter. This brings up all of our search information, and you can see all of the information available. And it's, let's see, what am I going to look for here? It's probably under important concepts because there isn't one. I guess updates using trace. There we go. Using trace, here we are. So to force a channel's new value to go backwards in the queue list, trace can be used instead. So trace works just like using tracking mode, except all forward values change backwards through the queue list until it sees a move instruction. So move instruction is a change instruction. In the example below, the channel below has been adjusted while Q3 is live on stage. Using trace will take those adjusted levels and update them into the queues that follow. Channels 1s will now be recorded into 2. 2s is recorded all the way back into channel 1, because presumably these were the original states, right? So these are the original states. So when we change Q3, trace will trace that back. That will trace all the way back. And so let's see. And channel 3 is now recorded into channel 3, because when we look at channel 3, that was different to begin with. So it doesn't trace backwards because the prior value was different. This because the movement structure for the channels compares indication, and that's using record Q3 trace enter. Exactly. To force the channel's new value to go backwards in the queue list, trace can be used. So yeah, I don't remember. I think it has to do with when you're not in tracking mode is why the force needs to be used. So I think that's why I don't use it, because I'm always in tracking mode. So there, we learned together. If someone knows differently, put it down in the comments. I'd like to see where I'm misunderstanding trace. Like I said, I don't use it a lot, so I don't remember offhand, but the single use of trace I use extensively. I might do it on a per channel basis or on a per queue basis, as you saw there, where we want those values to trace up the stack previously. Otherwise, if we're just making changes, they're being made here. I've been doing this intuitively without saying it. There's a difference between live and blind. Blind, again, nobody's seeing it on stage. And the reason why we're in blind is the only place where you'll see the spreadsheet view. You can't see the spreadsheet view in live. This is a blind only feature, so you won't see this beautiful table this way. What's also important is in blind is that it automatically, effectively updates after every command. So when I say 3 at 3, enter, it changes that to 3. I don't have to update it. But let's go into live and show you how that looks like in live. So when I'm in live, and I'll bring up 38 so you can see the lighting fixtures on stage. I'm sitting in Q3, you can see Q3 there. I can say 1 at 30, enter, and it's red, it's manual, which means that it's not saved anywhere. And so if what I've got to do is if I actually want that to be in Q3 now, I have to say update, enter, and now it turns purple. It is now saved in the queue. We've got no red or manual values showing. While we're in there, let's do this. I'm going to say channel 2 at 4 for 40, U for update, and this will tell you what's actually being saved. Target is Q3, that's the label. The channels being modified are channels 2 is the only thing being updated. Nothing else is getting updated. And then there's a couple update styles, and these will come into when we have, most importantly, when we're dealing with moving lights. So we'll skip that for now, but just so you can see that comes up automatically. But if I normally press update, enter, and it saves those changes into the queues. Again, you can see the color code as things are going up and down in a value. Let's see, what else do we want to talk about? Queues and updating values. So as we walk through here, we can see things go up, they go down. Again, the white says, listen, this is effectively a magenta because it was already 30, but I'm absolutely set to 30, which means that if you change the prior queue, it will not track forward into here because this is still explicitly set to that. So what we can do here in blind, let's see, what do we want to show here in blind about those? What you can set, this is a way, so these, the white underlines are what we call auto blocks, which means it's automatically preventing you from rewriting this. It's there. This is effectively, it's not a tracked value. This is a discrete value. And let's just say we want to get rid of that. That was a mistake. So we are sitting in Q2 as highlighted. And if I press 2 for channel 2 and at enter, it will remove that value being stored. So now it's back to a tracked value. In fact, at enter is probably the most common way to remove something from doing something else that's stored. Now, if we did that, if I go back and I do Control X for undo, and I undo that channel to at, and now I'm in live, I'm not in blind, and I say to at enter, you see it goes to a manual value, and I'll have to update that first. And now when I update it, it shows it as a tracked value. Okay, let's continue on the thoughts or talking about blocks. So I'll go back into blind, which is F2, and I'll say Q2, and then we want block. And block is available in a couple of places. I believe it's under attributes. Nope, not under attributes. Where are we at for block? I know we've got a soft key for it, or a hard key. I guess there's no soft key. So on the physical keyboard here, you'll see block there, which is a B. So I'll click block there and enter. And I'll hit F1. And so now in here, let's Since we're not dealing with timings, I'll turn timings off, but turn flags on. So now you can see there's some B's there. And again, the lowercase b with the underline is an auto block saying, hey, I've got something here. I'm blocking the fact that I've got a duplicate value, where the big B means that this is a queue level block. And so now when I hit F2 to go into blind, everything looks the same. Nothing appears to have changed, except all of the purple values have now changed to white with no underline. And what those mean is it doesn't matter what I do now. If you want to think of block or lock in the sense that now I can go to Q1 and I can take all channels, so 1 through that at, let's do a different value, 70, enter. And those all go to 70, but none of those values track forward because 2 is blocking, saying all of these channels need to stay where they're at. Do not let tracked values spill into this next queue. The way Q2 looks is exactly the way I want it to look. So that's our blocking feature, which is super important. This is most often used in conjunction with something like a blackout. So we're coming to the end of the end of an act, a scene. We need to black out the stage. The stage is going to go to the super low value. And I don't care what changes we make before this. I don't want to have to keep on coming back to this blackout queue and setting the look. I want it to look specifically at these low values. I don't care what the prior one was. So this is super helpful when you're going back. Like if you only ever went through and lit from beginning to end, you are fine. But the reality is we keep going back and doing revisions. And so this allows revisions in earlier queues to prevent or being blocked from spilling into subsequent queues. So logical places for this are, again, at blackouts. I also use it when I do a lot of stuff for music. Every song starts with a block so that the way the last song looks doesn't necessarily spill into the next song. That's not always the right thing, depending on the type of show or concert you're putting together. Sometimes you want it to be an organic feel from song to song. But for example, I might do dance routines where we go from a dance routine to a blue out to another song, and there's not a single thing I want from the last song tracking forward to the next song. So block stops anything from coming into it. The official documentation and training says think of it like the roof on a house. It prevents anything from flowing down into the next part. So it's a roof or a layer or a cap that prevents anything from going down into the next one. So those are blocks. While we're at it, let's talk about, in fact, this is fun. This is almost combining a couple of concepts here. I'll go back into live. We'll go back into Q2, and we're going to do that follow hang again. So we'll do a follow of 1. Okay. And so now we've added that follow in there. So those are going to go right after one another. And I'm going to go into Q2 or Q3 here, and I'm going to take channel 2, and I'm going to bring that up to full. So at full, enter. And so the logic is it's going to start at 70, it's going to go down to 30, and then back up to full. Okay, and let's see what that looks like when we actually run the queue. So I'll do Control Spacebar to go back. And all we've got on right now is a follow hang. So I want you to just pay attention here to Q or channel 2. So we're going down, and then we're going back up all the way up to full. And in fact, is that the best example? Let me think about that for a second. I almost always the asserts really become, or we're going to be talking about asserts, are usually most significant when we're doing things like moving lights. Let me think through this. How do I often use this? Okay, so let's do this. We're going to take Q2 and we're going to remove the hang. And what we're going to do, yeah, so let's actually, we're going to go to teach another concept first before we get to this. So let's talk about timings a little bit here. So I'll remove our flags and just show timings. That way we're conserving our space. And since we're not dealing with moving lights, I'm going to remove the beam focus and color. So we just have intensity. Oops, focus is still on there. Let's get rid of focus as well. So we've got just intensity and overall duration showing as we go through our cues. And so what we've got here is each cue takes 5 seconds. And so the first thing we'll do is let's sit here. So in Q2, I'm going to hit I for time. And if I set this to 3, enter, that's going to make my cue time 3. And again, that's the up and down time is 3. So if we go back, when we go into it, now it takes 3 seconds instead of 5 seconds. And we have values both going up and down within 3 seconds. So you can see that where we've got like a wash, and then we're kind of going to a spotlight look on just one person. In fact, we'll take channel 6 at 3 to bring that down to 30, and we'll save that. So now we get kind of goes a spotlight look, and then we'll go into the next cue, and we've got some other lights coming up, other lights going down, all within 5 seconds. But what we'll do here is in Q2, instead I'll hit T for time, and I'll do 3 and then /3. In fact, I'll do 3/1, might make it more obvious. And now when I push that, you'll see that my up time is 3 and my down time is 1. So now when I go back, control space, and now I go into it, you'll see that the other lights drop down really quickly, and then the other one still slowly ramps up. And so that gives us the look that you're getting there. So that's uptime versus downtime. And then beyond that, we can actually add delays. And so what I'll do is I'll say Q2 D for delay, and I'll say 2. And this might seem kind of strange to begin with. And I'll explain where we really use it often. But now when I go into it, I'll take the cue right away, but 1001, 1002, and then it does its transition. So that's the indication there. So when we've got the 2 outside the box, it means we're going to delay for 2 seconds and then actually do what's listed in that queue. And on something like this, it seems rather silly, because why not just wait 2 seconds before you take the cue? But the reason we'll do that is we often won't do that just on intensity, but we may do it where we have the intensity go immediately, but the color change might wait 3 seconds. And again, we don't necessarily need to write 2 cues if all we want to do is the next cue would change color. And so that's where these timing elements come in. So to undo it, I'll just hit D for delay and enter, and you see that that clears it out right away. And now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about discrete timing, which is also useful. Discrete timing can get you into some trouble because it hides certain information. And so what I'll first do is I'll set our timing to 1 across the board. So now our up and down time is at 1. You do see that it's split like that because we discretely called out up versus down time previously. So now our time is 1. And so now when we go out, there we are at 70, and then within 1 second, we get to our new look. We saw previously how we could delay or postpone that up value versus the down. But now what we're going to do is talk about discrete timing. And so what discrete timing says is, do apply these timing elements discretely or specifically to either channels or attributes of those channels. And right now we're only dealing with intensity to keep it easy. But what I can do is I can say 1 plus 6. And I guess I should call this out. If you're using a keyboard on a regular computer, On here, the plus sign is the plus sign. And if you've got a keyboard that's got a number pad off to the right, then you can use the plus button over there. But if you're on the main center part of your keyboard and you're using the numbers above the letters, you just press equals. You don't have to do shift equals, which gives you the plus sign usually. The equals button gives you plus. A little smart that way. So I'm going to grab channels 1 plus 6. So that's the two channels, just 1 and 6. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say I for time. Oops. 1 plus 6. That's Q1 plus this. Channels 1 plus 6. Time. And I'm going to say, let's make that really big. 12. Enter. And that doesn't save. You see these little reds here. The little red T means discrete timing. U for update, enter. And so now those turn blue because the timing discrete is coming up from the base. And then you see that now here for the down, because the values are decreasing in value, there's a little plus sign there. You see that? And so that lets you know that there is some discrete timings at play. So let's see what that looks like. Control space to go back. And I'll press spacebar. And you can see those two persist for a real long time. And now they're really slowly going out over the 12 seconds we defined. And so, 2, 3, and 5 drop within 1 second, but 1 and 6 come down really slowly over time to give us just a different effect on the stage. And so this plus sign calls out, hey, you've got discrete timings at play, and that can be used anywhere. So when you see that little plus, it says, listen, there's something discrete. It's happening on a channel or parameter basis. It's not affecting every fixture. If you're getting weird results, that's why. And again, your little Q there is the T for time. And I don't know if that shows here. Let's see. Yes, it does. Great. So on the on-screen keyboard, you see there time, Control-Alt-I on a PC. And so while I'm here, if I hit Control-Alt and I, while I hold that down, you'll see now that instead of the attribute values of 30% for the intensity, when I'm holding down the time button or Control-Alt-I, you can see there that it shows you the discrete timings. In here, the discrete timings for intensity is 12 seconds. So that's one place you can see it. If you go into blind, same thing, Control-Alt-I shows it on this, and this just shows it in the spreadsheet view over time. Becomes even more important when you're looking at moving lights where you might have discrete timing where the intensity might go in 1 second, but the move or the position, like the pan and tilt, might take 12 seconds. So we can expose that data. This is the way it's been done for a long time. For things that aren't likely to ever need to be changed or modified, this is probably the way I would do it. However, more often than not, I come into cases where I'm going to want to change that. So let me go here. I'm going to undo our discrete timings here. I'll undo the update. Let's see, how far back do we want to go? I think we can just undo that update. Come back into live. That looks good to me. So the other way we can do this is what's called a part queue. And so you can break one queue into multiple parts. And the biggest reason for multiple parts is it helps expose some discrete timing data so that in the future, if this is something you need to modify, it just makes it that much easier to understand or work out. And so what I'll do here is I'll say 1 plus 6 time of 12, just like before. But instead, I'm going to hit record or let's see, enter. So I've now entered it, and then I'll record, and then P for part, and then number 2. And as soon as I press that, it'll say confirm. Great. So now I have a part 1 and a part 2 to this queue. And so let's see, that looks like it did not record the way I wanted it to. So 1 plus 6, update part 2, enter. Oh, because it shows me in Q3. So 1 through, Let's go back. So, yeah, let's go back. So we're in Q2, so control space. So I'm going to take channels 1 plus 6, update, P for part 2, enter. So those should be in part 2, and I'm not sure why not. Let's go into blind F2. Because I'm only applying timings, that's why. So let's undo all this. Let's get back to, because I'm trying to break out timing discrete from everything else. So here's the way to do it properly. Again, it's kind of what I'm doing by the flow. So channel 1 plus 6 at 30, record, at 30, enter. And then 1 plus 6, so now we've set their values. Record, part 2, enter. And we confirm that. So now we've got some in part 1 and some in part 2. So when I go into blind, you'll see here part 1 and part 2 broken out. And so what you'll see here is part 1, you'll see how you have part 1 and part 2, and channels can only be in one part or another. It can't exist in both. So that was the mistake I was making earlier, was I was affecting something that was in one part for somewhere else. So what you'll see is you'll see these gray values. So part 1 here, channel 1 and 6 are gray because they're not actually getting affected by part 1. They're not getting affected until part 2. So you can see that. See how that's broken out there. And so now with that in view, go back into live. I can go Q2 part 2 time 12, enter. Okay. And so now you've got part 1 and part 2. So now if I go back to Q1, 0 into 1. When I go into Q2, it's going to have the exact same effect as what we saw earlier with discrete timing, where everything fades out quickly, but then the last two, channel 1 and 6, kind of slowly take their time to get there over 12 seconds. The reason you do it in parts is now if we need to change that timing, it's super visible here. So I can go Q2 part 2 time of 20, and it's as simple as that. Now when I re-trigger it, those fixtures, all of those that were selected, are now doing it at the time of 20 or in any other time I want to do it. So the biggest reason to break things out into parts, as I see it, is editability and transparency. It just makes it so much easier to see that data and what channels are being affected versus discrete timing all kept in a single queue. And again, so my thought process is, when do I use a part queue versus just all discrete timing within a single queue, is editability. If it's something I don't think I'll ever need to edit, then I'll go ahead and do discrete timing within a single queue. But if it's something that I know I'm going to have to edit into the future for various reasons, then I might break it out into parts just so that it's visually makes sense on the way that that plays out. All right, we're at an hour 40, so this is already going really long. Let's see. That makes me think of the last thing we're going to show when we just talk about discrete timings. So I'm going to click undo again. I'm going to go back up here quite a bit. And we might even go further. There we are. So now back into live. So Q1, everything's at 70. Q2. Let's modify Q2. So we're going to take 1 through 6 at 30. All right, 20, sure. Update that. So now we're coming from 70 down to 30 in 5 seconds uniformly. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about discrete timings and some things we can do. So this would be an example, maybe I'm never going to want to modify the timing on this or want an easy way to display this, and you'll see why here in a moment. I'm going to say 1 through 6. I'm going to say delay 0 through, we'll go 12 just so it's dramatic. Okay, update. So now you see we've got our little T indicators there and our little plus indicator there showing that things are, they have discrete timing, so it's not uniform. So I'll go back into Q1, and then now when I go into Q2, watch what happens. This one fires, then this one, and then this one. So it's just a slow, gradual fade across the stage here. And again, we probably wouldn't do that in real time. That's probably slow, but I just wanted to use that for dramatic effect. So now I'll show you the next kind of cool thing you can do here. Shift Enter. If I hit Shift Enter, it will cycle through the last, I forget how many, 5 or 10 most last entered commands. So I can just hit Shift Enter and it gets this back up on the screen. And now instead of 0 through 12, I can say 0 through 3. And update Enter, and then Control space to get us back to the prior queue. And now when I fire it, you can see there's kind of a faster look there. And while I'm at it, I might change the fade time overall to 2 seconds. So let's do that again. So you can see just that wash across as it goes out. All right, so that is discrete timings, and say that is something I don't want to modify because that just gets really, really messy to look at that. Again, Control-Alt-I will expose those times, and so you can see those times kind of splayed out there. And so it makes editing, like what was the logic, what was I thinking here, a little more complicated, but it might be fine to do this. So again, that might be an example of, and I certainly wouldn't want to do 6 part queues for that. That would be just untenable to see on the screen. So different approaches. While we're at that, we'll talk about another fun effect. So I'll do 1 through 6 again. And then we've got this offset button here, so I'll say offset, and you can see the 6 channels there, and then I can say mirror out, for example. And now I'll go time 0 through 3, enter, and we'll update that. And now watch what happens. Why didn't that do what I thought it would do? Did I not press enter? Let's try that again. Because I believe I need fan, but let's just double check this real quick. Yep, that's exactly what I'm missing. So, so what we're going to do is we're going to do mirror, offset, mirror out, and then I need another modifier here called fan. And I'm going to say forward. You can do forward or reverse. There's forward. And then I'll do time 0 through 3. And now when you look at the exposed times, nope. You know, I recall this being a bug that was documented now that I think about it, and I believe it may be fixed in 10. I'd have to look through the forums on this, but I do remember something similar to this being showed up as a bug somewhere. Let's just set those times back to default. 1 through 6 time, or those are delays, that's probably why. Yes, I had delays, so that's where I was getting myself all out of sorts. 1 through 6 time, enter. Great. And if you see the plus there, so Control-Alt-I, you see that those are pluses. That means that it's just tracking or the default or what's in the queue there. So let's try this all over again. Let's go back. I can't remember which of these that it's supposed to be. Yeah, I think it's only 5. So 1 through 6. And so soft key is offset, which is Alt-5. I'll go mirror out, and then I'll say delay 0 through 3, enter. And now Alt-Control-I. Yes, now you can see how those times, the delay times, which is before the slash, you can see the middle 2 are 0, the outer 2 are 0.5, and then the far outs are 3. So now when I update this is the way I should have done it. Got my times and delays backwards. So here we go. Now when I roll it, you can see the middles go out right away, then the second 2, and then the furthest one's out. If you want to make that more dramatic, we'll set that to 1 second and try that again. Right, and those delays were rather slow, because 3 seconds. So now again, I can go and we'll do 0 through 1 second on the delays and update that. Go back. Let's try it now. Right, a little more dramatic that way. Again, those are our delay times, so let's undo those. 1 through 6, delay, enter, which now removes those discrete delay times. And then instead we'll do 1 through 6, offset, mirror in, delay, 0 through 1, enter, update, enter. And now when we go back, it goes from the outside in. And if we wanted a bigger dramatic effect, maybe we set that to 2. But we set the time to 0.3, update, control space. We'll do this again. Right, boom, boom, boom. Right. So discrete timing, in this case, we're using discrete timing as the delay. And then our actual transition time is 0.5. If I hit F2, we can see in blind. Control Shift I to show you your timings. You can see it here as well. But again, a lot of that information ends up getting hidden behind that little nasty plus symbol, which is what can get you caught up. So that's where having part queues can really help. Let's see, what else do we want to do within the time we have remaining? Let's see if there's anything here. Channels 1 through 6. Fan is super useful on moving lights, but we'll stick with offset here for a moment. So with offset, you've got all these different attributes that are used often, not necessarily in something like a front light scenario. That gets really weird. We've shown things like mirror in, mirror out, and reverse, which just reverses the order. And those work well when you're doing like a channel X, like a time or an intensity in a range, right? Random channels can be interesting as well. And what that is we'll do that and we'll say, 1 through, or random channels, offset, random channels at for intensity 1 through full, enter. And now that those are, they're not consistent there, right? Why might we do something random? In a front light situation, that sounds insane, but if we were to turn around and we were to take a look at this from the perspective of like, we are looking at, instead of it being front light, we're looking at it as like backlight or something, and you had a big grid of them and you wanted to give it more of a textured look instead of a specific fixture look, that's where that really can come into play. Let's move back to where we were before. You could also do groupings that way. So if I go offset, I can say channels per group 2. So let's see, 1 through 6, offset. So channels per group of 2. So now they're in groups of 2. And so they're the first 2, the second 2, and the third 2. And so now I can do at 1 through 8, and you can see 10, 45, and 80. So you can do like a gradation, but you want them grouped together. In the same thing, you can do interleave, which means it takes 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. So it's just sequenced a little differently. Again, you can mirror that in or out or reverse. And other ones that you can play with. I use a lot of these as actually precursors to things like chase FX, but FX is far beyond the time that we have remaining. Last thing we'll show you here, I think, and then we'll call this good at 2 hours. Just one aspect we can do here with the augmented environment is this is fully interactive. So I can choose a fixture, and now you can see that that's listed here. And so now I can set that at 60. So this can be useful if you don't know exactly which light it is channel number wise, because your labeling may not be great or you don't know, but you can actually physically see the fixture in the space. I can say, well, I want these 3, or I want to grab those ones. I want to grab these two and set them to 50. So that's one of the values of this environment is you can actually click on a fixture and go from there. And that is really, really, really just scratching the surface of it. I think, let's see here, I rarely use this. Yeah, so you've also got within here, I can select a fixture and I can go camera. And I can say fixture POV, and now it's giving me the POV of literally looking through the barrel of the fixture down at the stage. So again, another useful thing. Again, a little more useful perhaps on, say, a moving light or moving fixture, but the concepts remain the same. A lot of features here in version 3.3. They're adding a whole bunch of other really cool things. You could come in here to edit, and let's see. I rarely do it this way. I come in a different way, but you can literally take and throw a person there on stage. And so now I've got an actual like physical target that I've got to work with on stage, and I can use these handles, the X, Y, and Z, to move where their position is on the stage. And then, you know, I can have I'm just using Control C and Control V to copy paste. And so now all of a sudden I've got my 3 actors on the stage, and I can now manipulate the lights this way. And because I'm still set on that fixture perspective, anytime I select a fixture here, it will automatically take that vantage point. But I'll turn that mode off right now. And so, yeah, hopefully that was some really useful information. A common thing you'll hear in the trainings, which is great, getting you back to a known state. In fact, it's probably a great command just to teach in general, is sneak. I love this. So I'll take 1 and hit sneak and enter, and it takes 1 and it sneaks it back or slowly fades it back to what's called the background value. So what was the value that channel was at? So it basically removes the manual attributes. And I chose channel 1, but if I just do sneak, enter, it will take all of them back to their background values. In other words, removing manual value. In the training, they'll talk to you about clear sneak enter. So that's simply clear, right? So that clears your command line so that there's nothing on there, right? So we're going to go clear, sneak, enter. And that removes everything from the command line and basically brings everything back to having non-manual values. So at this point, I'll do Shift Update to quick save the file, and we'll call this at 2 hours. And hopefully you'll learn some stuff. Subscribe to the channel. We'll come back with another live stream to go through some more information on setting up a show from zero to programming some shows, some recap onto this. We've gone and patched some conventional fixtures, gone through the layout, set them up in Augmented, gone through the concept of queue timings for up and down timing. We've done discrete timings where we're assigning timings specifically to channels. We've talked about using things like modifiers like through or offset. We've talked about how tracking works, how blocking queues work. We touched barely, but we're really going to get back to the way to use assert, which is super helpful. Not really useful in a 3 queue stack, but when we've got a 10 queue stack, I can set a much better example of where assert would come into play. And that is it for now. Thank you so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.